And welcome from the League of Women Voters of Portland. I'm Debbie Kay, President of the League. The League of Women Voters is dedicated to making democracy work. One of our core beliefs is that democracy functions best when voters are informed about issues and engaged in their communities. For that reason, we present programs like this to give our Portland and Multnomah County neighbors an opportunity to think about the issues that affect our lives and the well-being of our communities. We're pleased to have you join our program tonight, featuring 3 commissioners from the Portland Charter Review Commission, and also the Commission's project manager. They will share the city's ongoing charter review process and how we can all help voters stay engaged in these important reforms. The League is grateful for support from the Carol and Velma Sailing Foundation and from our media partner, Metro East Community Media. They record our civic education panels as well as our voter education presentations and rebroadcast them on community access channels and social media. Please tell your friends and family to watch this program when it's posted on our website, lwvpdx.org, on or after February 11th. In addition, I am pleased that we have a new resource to offer. With the help of Metro East, the Portland League is creating podcasts from our voter education and these civic education programs. We hope you and your friends will find it convenient to listen to our podcasts on your favorite platform. You may also listen from a link on our website. We sincerely thank our speakers, the moderator, and the League volunteers who donate their time and expertise to bring these programs to you. The moderator for tonight's program is Linda Mantell, Development Chair of the League of Women Voters of Portland. Linda is a retired biologist and academic and has been with the League for 4 years. She's also a member of the Downtown Neighborhood Association's Charter Review Committee. I'll now turn the program over to my esteemed colleague, Linda Mantell.
Thank you, Debbie, and thank you everyone for joining us tonight. We look forward to hearing from our panelists about the City of Portland Charter and the charter review process that's now underway. We will hear from our speakers for about an hour, then open up the program for your questions, which you can put in the chat at any time. We will save them till the end, but you can put them in at any time. First, we wanted to share some background about why this topic is so important to our League. The commission structure has governed the City of Portland since 1913. The mayor, 4 commissioners, and the city auditor are elected in a nonpartisan manner, citywide, on a staggered voting schedule. Each commissioner has 3 roles: legislative, that is, adopting the budget, passing laws, policies, and regulations that govern the city. Second, administrative, wherein each commissioner is assigned by the mayor to oversee 1 or more city bureaus which carry out these policies. And third, quasi-judicial, hearing land use and other appeals. Other than preparing the budget and allocating bureaus to individual commissions, the mayor's role is the same as that of the other commissioners. Very few, if any, other cities in the country have this form of government anymore. Since 1913, there have been 8 elected attempts to change the system of government, none of which succeeded. Some of these were proposed by citizen petition, and the last attempt, which many of you may remember, in 2007, was proposed by a charter review commission, which started working in 2006. The proposal that they came up with was opposed by some of the sitting commissioners, by unions, by former mayors, and indeed by the League of Women Voters of Portland, which felt at the time that the changes being proposed would not make for substantial improvements. Just for some background, before advocating for or against a local issue like charter reform, the League develops a position through thorough study, including interviews of leaders involved, reading extensive background materials, outside review, and a discussion with our members that brings us consensus on a position with which we can then advocate. The League had last reviewed its position on city government in 1991. This position introduced some criteria for assessing whether a city is well managed and provided some details of alternate forms of city government, including some data related to other cities of our size. In 2007, we felt that the current form of government was accountable, flexible, and responsive to citizens, so our position supported the Commission form of government at that time. However, since this last study in 1991, Portland has changed a lot. It has become larger, more complex, and much more diverse in its population. So in the spring of 2017, members of the League voted to conduct a 2-year restudy of the League position on city government because of gaps in the 1991 position. Our study, which was published in September 2019, I hope you can all see it, available from the League on our website, reviewed the strengths and weaknesses of the current system in Portland, examined options for the form, function, roles, and responsibilities of a city government, and considered standards that should be applied to determine if a particular system was effective in serving its constituents. After much discussion, we adopted a new position in 2019, and the position states as follows in brief. The League of Women Voters of Portland believes that a thriving, livable city requires a government that meets these criteria: accountability, responsiveness, equity, efficiency, effectiveness, transparency, and nonpartisanship. Our members believe that to more fully meet these criteria, Portland needs to improve its government structure. The highest priorities for change are to improve citizen representation by increasing the number of commissioners, to institute a city manager, and to establish the city council as a legislative or policy setting body. We also support electing some or all city councilors by district. That's our position. In light of this position, we fully support the activities of the current Charter Review Commission and are eagerly awaiting their recommendations. In the meantime, this evening we will get to hear directly from the project manager, Julia Meyer, about the scope and process of the commission's work. And then we'll hear individually from 3 commissioners as to what brought them to their involvement in the commission and responses to some questions that are relevant to their work. At this time, I'd like to introduce our panelists. Julia Meyer, Charter Commission Project Manager, and 3 commissioners, Candace Avalos, Amira Streeter, and Melanie Billings-Yun. First, Julia Meyer serves as the Charter Commission Project Manager. Prior to joining the commission, she was executive director of the Portland City Club, where she supported research projects on Portland's commission form of government and alternative voting methods. She also spent 8 years with the Coalition of Communities of Color, advancing a collective of racial justice efforts through policy analysis and advocacy, leadership development, and culturally appropriate data and research. Candace Avalos is a first-generation American Black Tina, daughter of Guatemalan immigrants and Black Virginians from the South. After receiving her master's in higher education, she moved to Portland in 2013 to work at Portland State University, where she advises student government and Greek life. She is chair of the Citizen Review Committee for the Police Department and serves on the Governor's Public Safety Training and Standards Task Force. She is co-founder of the city's Black Millennial Movement, which strives to bring a community for young Black leaders to help them access resources they need to succeed. Amira Streeter is the Natural Resources Policy Advisor on Governor Brown's staff. Her policy portfolio includes sustainability and environmental justice. She brings to the commission her extensive experience in government policy, collaborative problem solving, and community empowerment. She has worked in the private and nonprofit sectors and in several levels of government, including city government and the state legislative branch. Melanie Billings-Yun is an international negotiations consultant, mediator, and an adjunct professor in the School of Business at PSU. Born in Portland, she's lived in 9 countries and work throughout Asia, North America, Europe, and the Middle East, helping individuals and organizations resolve disputes, bridge cultural differences, and build more productive relationships. Throughout her career, Melanie has worked to help women amplify their voices, which was the topic of her 2015 TEDx talk in Malaysia. So thank you all for joining us. Thank you in advance for your public service. And we're excited to hear from you about the Commission's work. So we're ready for the presentation now by Julia Meyer.
Thank you so much, Linda. And thank you to the League of Women Voters of Portland for having us. I know how much you all have worked on these issues. Okay, so I'm going to start us in the beginning. What is a city charter? So our city charter is a guiding document that establishes the government system and structure of the city. Our city charter allows Portland to decide how our city government is set up, how we vote for city leaders, the roles of our elected leaders, and what they are responsible for doing. The best way that I've come to think about a city charter is that it's like a constitution for the city. It creates the city as a legal entity, it authorizes the city powers, and it outlines the basic broad fundamentals of city government. And charters, like constitutions, are generally meant to be relatively short documents that don't need frequent amendment because it has a high threshold for amendment. And our city charter can only be amended by a vote of the people. So our charter requires that at least once every 10 years, Portland City Council appoint a charter commission, whose job is to review and recommend changes to the charter. City Council appointed this current charter commission in December of 2020, and it had been 10 years since the previous charter review. And again, the Charter Commission's job is hard, but simple. It's to review the charter and recommend any changes for Portlanders to consider. And that process is called the charter review process, and it's happening right now. So City Council appointed 20 Portlanders to serve on the Charter Commission. And so if we think as Portlanders that something isn't working for our communities, how do we make changes to the charter? So as I mentioned, there's 20 charter commissioners. If 15 or more of them agree to a recommendation, then those recommendations go directly to the ballot for Portlanders to vote on. If a majority of charter commissioners, but less than that supermajority of 15, agree to a proposed charter reform, then those recommendations go to City Council, and City Council can decide what to do with them. They could refer them to the ballot as is, they could modify them, or they could do nothing. So what I think it's important for folks to keep in mind is that it's only by a vote of Portlanders that the charter can be changed. What is unique about the Charter Commission's authority is that it can refer charter changes directly to the ballot. So that normal process we're used to as community members of collecting signatures, that's not required in this case. And again, nor does City Council have any say over the Commission's recommendations, so long as 15 or more charter commissioners agree to a specific reform. So as I mentioned, charter commissioners were appointed in December of 2020, so a little bit more than a year ago, and they serve 2-year terms. So charter commissioners' terms and sort of our charter review process will end in December of 2022. And this past summer, the Charter Commission chose to approach charter review in 2 phases. And that means 2 sets of issues, 2 reports, 2 election cycles. So the first phase that we're in now is focused on 2 issues. 1, form of government, and 2, city council elections. And the second phase will start probably in spring of this year and will take on an additional set of questions. But for these big phase 1 issues of form of government and city council elections, our intention is for our recommendations to be on the November 2022 ballot. And kind of under state law, in order to qualify for the November 2022 ballot, our ballot referrals have to be done no later than July 7th of this year. So as the commission began its work, it really spent significant time articulating desired outcomes for charter reform. And any potential charter reforms will be evaluated based on their ability to advance these outcomes. So 1, a participatory and growing democracy with more voices being heard in elections. 2, an accessible and transparent government with counselors who are easy to reach. 3, a reflective government with counselors who look like the community they represent. 4, a responsive government with counselors who understand your community needs. 5, an accountable government with counselors who answer to the people. And 6, a trustworthy government with counselors who safeguard democracy. So I'm now going to turn it over to Commissioner Avalos to describe our current form of government and our current city council elections and some of the alternatives that the Charter Commission has been considering.
Thank you, Julia. So on your screen, this is an image of a commission form of government like Portland's. Portland is the only large city in the entire United States that has a commission form of government. In this form of government, the mayor and commissioners share executive, legislative, administrative, and quasi-judicial authority. City bureaus are directly managed by individual commissioners or the mayor. The mayor assigns and reassigns bureaus to themselves and to city commissioners. And the commissioner in charge can then appoint and remove bureau directors. The mayor proposes the budget based on individual bureaus' requested budgets. The mayor and city commissioners have huge administrative roles because they directly manage bureaus. The biggest difference of power between the mayor and the city commissioners is that the mayor decides which bureaus each commissioner will run. The commission spends time building and understanding, the commission spent time building understanding about our current form of government and identifying problems with our form of government. When evaluating our current form of government, we found that the biggest gap with our desired outcomes was with a responsive government where counselors understand your community needs. That outcome considers things like government's ability to address complex long-term issues, to act collaboratively, and to respond to local issues. There are 2 key alternative forms of government that we've been researching and considering: a mayor-council government and a council-manager government. In the mayor-council form of government, the mayor is the chief executive of the city, appoints bureau directors, and hires a chief administrative officer to run and manage bureaus. The mayor also creates the first draft of the city's budget. In the mayor-council form, city council acts as the primary lawmaking body for the city. City councilors would sit on different committees to develop policy agendas and to approve the budget. And then in the council manager form, the city council appoints an unelected city manager. The mayor has limited executive power over the implementation of the city's policies and overall has more similar powers to the city council. The mayor focuses on deciding the daily policy agenda for the city council's meetings and works with the city manager to draft the city's budget. The city manager is responsible for running the city's bureaus, carrying out the laws, and helping to draft the city budget. There are a few differences that we want to highlight between the mayor-council and the council-manager form. The biggest difference between a mayor-council government and council-manager is who has the most executive power. In a mayor-council government, the mayor has the most executive power, whereas in a council-manager government, the city manager holds this role. Another difference is who supervises the person that runs the bureaus. In a mayor-council government, the mayor alone supervises the chief administrative officer, whereas in a council-manager government, the city council and the mayor together supervise the city manager. Now I'm going to provide an overview of our current elections. The word constituency refers to the people in an area a leader represents. In Portland, the mayor and the 4 city commissioners are elected at large, meaning citywide. The open seats for city commissioners are marked positions 1 through 4, and each candidate decides which position to run for. Then voters choose only one candidate for each position. The mayor and commissioners for positions 1 and 4 are elected in presidential years, and the auditor and commissioners for positions 2 and 3 are elected in midterm years. In our current voting system, the candidate that receives the most votes wins. A candidate might win the majority of the votes, over 50%, or they might win even if they get less than 50% of the votes. Portland has both a primary election in May and a general election in November. If a candidate receives a majority of the votes cast in the primary, they win instantly. If no candidate wins more than 50%, the 2 candidates with the highest number of votes cast appear on the general election ballot in November. When evaluating our elections, the commission found significant gaps with 2 of our desired outcomes: a participatory and growing democracy with more voices being heard in elections, and a reflective government where councilors look like the communities that they represent. So, what are some of the alternatives for our city council elections? Let's talk about it. One of the alternatives that we are considering is dividing Portland into multi-member districts so that elected leaders can represent geographic areas of the city instead of the entire city. Multi-member districts mean that more than one elected leader could represent each geographic area. Most commissioners prefer multi-member district because they believe this system would help community members feel more connected to their elected leaders and increase accountability between communities and elected leaders. Because multiple leaders would represent one area of the city, this would also increase collaboration and coalition building for geographic issues between those leaders. Multi-member systems also work really well with preferential voting, which helps to give smaller communities more representation on the city council. Or the other option is to have a hybrid of these constituencies. In hybrid systems, some city council members are elected by district and some are elected at large or citywide. The final area we've been researching is alternative voting methods. Let me begin by saying that there are many alternative voting methods and many variations within those methods. The City Council Elections Committee has begun by exploring 2 alternatives: ranked choice voting and star voting. We recognize that this doesn't yet capture the entire landscape of voting methods, however. As a reminder, in our current system, voters can only pick one candidate they want to represent them. This is the ballot that you see on the left, called Pick One. The middle is star voting, and the right is choice voting. Star stands for score, then automatic runoff. Using star voting, voters can give the candidates a score of how much they like them using a scale of 0 to 5. So in this example, let's say you really didn't like the candidate named Alan, so you gave them 1 star, but Bianca and Edith are your favorite, so you give them both 5 stars. Using ranked choice voting, voters can rank the candidates based on how much they prefer them. So in this example, let's say that Jada is your top choice, so you rank her in your first choice spot, and Vera is not your top choice, so you give her the 5th spot on your ballot. Using both star and choice voting, it's clear that voters get more use out of their ballot and get to express their full range of preferences for the candidates. The commission has prioritized both ranked choice voting and star as options because they capture multiple preference. They allow a decision in one election when voter turnout is the highest. They promote a proportional system where the same winners can't take all the seats. And they allow more chances at electing candidates that Portlanders can identify with. So now that you have a better understanding of our current form of government and city council elections, also the alternatives that we've been considering and prioritizing, I'm going to turn it over to Commissioner Billings-Yoon, who's going to talk about the commission's areas of agreement and what's next in the charter review.
Thanks, Candace. All right, let's look at the first one. We have 3 areas of agreement, and I'll take you through one by one. The first is to shift the constituency of city council from all at-large seats into a district form of system and to increase the size of the city council. We're still working on in our groups a few the specifics of this. For example, how many councilors, how many districts, how many councilors per district, and how that districting process would work. We think that we'll probably have the answers to that within a month, and we're working on that very hard right now. I should tell you that most of our commissioners do believe that any ballot measure for districts should articulate exactly how that would be formed in terms of the criteria for districting, rather than us providing a district map. But absolutely, we feel that the city council was based on 200,000 people, 4 councilors. We now have more than 650 and rising, and we clearly need to increase the size of the city council. The last thing that I would say on this is that in the meetings that we have with citizens who come to our listening sessions, I think this is the one that we hear the most. People, especially up in the Southeast, are feeling unrepresented. They don't know who to go to when they have a problem. They don't know that people understand their problems. And so this is a very high demand on the part of Portlanders. The second thing that we're looking at, so just look down one, is to shift from the commission form of government to a form of government in which city councilors do not directly manage bureaus. This is obviously the League of Women Voters position. And in terms of our written commentary, this is the most common request that we get from voters. What we haven't determined yet is which form we're going to look at. And right now, the Charter Commission is roughly split 50-50, maybe a slight preference for council manager form, which I know is what the League of Women Voters came out with, but it's not a strong preference at that time. And I will also say, from talking to citizen groups, this one remains on the fence right now. In the council manager form, what I would say is the complaint against the council manager form is that people are saying that they want a system in which there is more accountability, that if you're not happy with the direction, you could remove that person through electoral systems. The arguments in favor of the council manager form are that you can handle more long-term problems in a way that you can't if that person who is in charge is replaced every 4 years. But I want to make it very clear that two things. First of all, this is more of a dichotomy than we actually feel it needs to be. So we're looking at a system in which we might take elements from each. And in whatever we decide, we would be looking for a professional who would be running the bureaus, not the current city council or the mayor, him or herself. Next. And the third thing that we've agreed to is to shift to a form of voting. This is the last thing that Candace was talking about, that allows a decision in one election and eliminates the primary and it captures people's preferences. This is for a few reasons. The first one is that the number of people who actually vote in the primary is minuscule, and it represents only a very special subsection of the Portland population. Generally, older and whiter people will vote in the primary, but we're not getting the full gamut of people who vote. And so to move everything to the general election, we would get more preference from a wider number of our electorate. And to adopt a voting method that captures people's preferences means that you wouldn't have people elected who only represent, say, 50% or 50, in actually the last election, slightly less than that, 50% plus one of the population, but a larger number of our population. We are again agreed that we want to move into some form of preferential voting, but we have not yet determined which one. I will say that the commissioners right now are leaning towards ranked choice voting. It has more of a record, but it is not yet fully determined. And if you have other opinions, such as a strong argument for star voting, please feel free to share that with us. So right now, to the next slide, some really important things, and this is very strongly coming out in all of the meetings that we're doing with the public. The first one, and I will underline this one 5 times, is fiscal impact. People want more representation, but they're worried about the cost. What is the fiscal impact of any reform package? We're looking into that right now. And of course, that will have an impact on whatever we decide. Portlanders right now feel this powerful combination of feeling unrepresented and also feeling that they're being taxed to the skies. So we have to look at what we can come up with that would be something that Portlanders could not only swallow, but embrace. We're also looking at ballot member construction. How many ballot measures does the reform package entail? Obviously, if you cram everything into one, then if anyone has an unhappiness with one aspect of that measure, they're going to vote the whole thing down. So we do need to divide it to some extent, but what kind of division makes sense if certain aspects are interrelated? For example, multi-member districts and ranked choice voting are very much interrelated, as I'm going to speak about a little bit later. We're going to be looking at the transition. How quickly can this be handled? How does it be handled? We look at geographic models in terms of how we would reform districts and intergovernmental relations. We've had a lot of questions saying, how does this fit with the county and with other systems that we have in place, Metro and so forth? Those are all things that we are asking the city to help us with answers to, that we do not have answers to yet at this point. So to look at our timeline, as Julia said right at the beginning, we are very much aiming to get this phase 1 on our November ballot. That doesn't give us a lot of time. We're aiming at March 31st to come up with the vote on what recommendations we are going to send to the voters. It then has to go through a process of financial analysis, language analysis, and so forth, so that we don't get thrown out by the as some measures got thrown out today for not being proper in the way that they were written. And by late June, we will have a final vote on the charter amendments that I am pretty confident we will get 15 votes and it will be able to go straight to the electorate. Finally, how can you engage? Well, you came to this meeting and that's a great first step. Maybe for some of you, it's more than your first step. If you go to charter review at portlandoregon.gov, you'll see so many ways. Submit written information, your written opinion. We actually read those and we count them up for how many people want one system versus another. Come and give verbal public comment at our full commission meetings once a month. If you are a shyer person, you can watch the meetings themselves. You can watch them on videotape. You can join charter events. You can get our monthly update. But you can find all of these at charter review at portlandoregon.gov. And on that basis, the last thing that I will say is we'll also come out and speak to your organization. If you have other organizations, whether it be a neighborhood association or a community group that wants to learn more about charter, talk to your family and friends. We do not want another defeat. We are tired of defeats. And so this is going to be the Charter Commission that changes that history. Thank you very much.
Thank you all. Thank you, Julia Meyer and Commissioner Avalos and Commissioner Billings-Young. There is so much meat in these things and so much to think about. And yet what you're suggesting in terms of outreach is so important. And that's why we're here tonight. That is one of the reasons that we're here. And I know Commissioner Billings-Young is going to come to our neighborhood association this month. And I know everybody is going around and seeing everybody. And I think that is wonderful. One of the things I really worry about is the people who haven't heard about this yet. And this includes some of my neighbors. So I talk about it whenever I can. And I say, do you know about charter review? What's that? And, I send them some things right away, because this to me is what's going to make this stand or sink, is getting the word out to people who have to know about this. So right now, what I'd like to do is ask the 3 commissioners a little bit about their backgrounds and what got them into this mess. I mean, how did you decide you wanted to do this? And what's the experience been like for you? So Commissioner Avalos, what in your life and work brought you to apply to be part of this commission? And how do you keep doing it?
This is a good question, and I feel like it's really interesting to hear all the stories of all the commissioners, because we're all coming at it from different angles, but I think we share a really solid thing, which is we see that there are ways our government can improve to better serve our communities. And so that's definitely something that has drawn me in. When I worked at PSU, I was helping young leaders learn how to get engaged in their government. And when I was trying to help them do that, I realized that Portland was just not a super accessible government to engage with. After I kind of looked into it more and just personally started getting more involved, I realized that there were lots of things that were different and unique about Portland, but not necessarily in a good way. And when I learned that there was this opportunity for a charter review process, I knew immediately that I wanted to participate and bring in that voice of young, engaged people that are trying to make a difference. So that's what brought me here.
Very good, very good. Commissioner Melanie Billingsyoung, what about you? What brought you to this? You're muted.
Whoops.
Yeah. Go ahead.
No.
That's okay. All right, go ahead.
I was born and raised in Portland and stayed here through college. And by the way, on the participant list, I saw Charlie White, who was my professor when I was at PSU. And then I lived for about 30 years overseas and was able, and was at historic times in many places, and was able to watch governments succeed and governments fail. Portland was always my Shangri-La to come back to. And when I came back, I saw government was failing, and it really shocked me. It was very worrisome to me. And so I wanted to be part of something that might be able to turn that around.
That's good. That's good. And Commissioner Amira Speeder, what brought you to this exalted group?
Well, as Commissioner Avalos said, I think we all have different experiences that bring us to the work. And when I applied to be a part of the Charter Review Commission, I really saw an opportunity to make impactful change for a city that I've called home for more than a decade now. I believe I moved to Portland right as the last Charter Review Commission was wrapping up their work. And I just find it fascinating that Portland has held on to a system that is so unique and different, I guess in the spirit of Portland being weird. And I think it's about time that we kind of really assess and make that change. I've had a really unique opportunity to work in government, as you mentioned, at the city level and at the state level. And having been part of a community that never really saw government working for me, it was very interesting to see the inner workings of city government and what was working and what doesn't work. And so I really saw this as an opportunity to get involved and make a really big difference in my community for future generations. And I'm hoping that we will get to that place. I'm really glad to see the different experiences of my fellow commissioners kind of come together. And as we've gotten to know each other and have these discussions, it's really been rewarding to see us move closer and closer to a solution that we can put in front of the voters.
Well, I agree. I think this is exactly what we want to go for, is good solutions to put in front of the voters. That's clearly what we need. So I now have a couple of questions about the charter review process. I'm going to ask each of you a specific question. Then if others would like to chime in, that's fine. So I know this is for Commissioner Avalos. And what has the commission learned from other cities about the form of government, and what are you proposing that will make us work better? And how can you get to a decision on some of these tough things like the mayor council or the city manager council?
Yes, thank you for that question. And that is definitely at the heart of a lot of what we're discussing. I think that one of the benefits of being in this position of having a commission form of government that no one else is doing is that other people have been able to, they've used different forms of government and have been able to learn what works and what doesn't. And so that has given us a really great chance to reflect on different cities that are similar to ours, some that are different, some that we feel are working, some we feel that aren't, and just look at all of that from a bigger picture and looking at the desired outcomes that we're seeking. How can we build a government for us that meets those outcomes? Melanie mentioned this, where it feels like it's a dichotomous choice to say mayor, council, or council manager. Of course, there's a traditional way to apply those forms of government, but we're really thinking thoughtfully on the commission about how we can adjust and tweak the ways that you use those systems to fit those desired outcomes. I think ultimately what we know is that Portlanders really dislike that commissioners oversee the bureaus directly. That is one of the comments we get the most from people. And we as a commission agree with that. So that is a big goal, and either of those forms of government can achieve that. I think another area that folks really want to see is more professional management and streamlined management of the bureaus. These are bureaus that offer direct services to the communities, and by having leadership shift so often through commissioners, it doesn't allow for a larger strategic vision for how to accomplish those big tasks. When we talk about addressing the houseless crisis in Portland, that's going to take lots of coordination between various bureaus and services. And so having somebody that can be funneling through all of that work can be funneling through is what Portlanders are asking for. So each of these forms of government are going to be able to offer that. And we're seeking to also, as one of our desired outcomes, make sure that there's accountability. So Portlanders want to hold someone accountable when the things that they vote for aren't being met. So I think that's a big area that we're trying to figure out who has the power. And as I explained, who has the executive power is a little different in each of those. And so we're trying to figure out what's the right fit for Portlanders.
Do any of the rest of you want to chime in on this question of the different models and what you've learned from other cities?
You know, a lot of people say you should look at San Francisco, you should look at Boston, you should look at Seattle. They all have different forms. And the fact is, we're not anyone else. And indeed, the last time that the League of Women Voters did this research, they said the Portland model is perfect. It's working really well. And so you can't really look at any city in a single point in time and say, that's what we should do. All we can do is look at them and say, that's an interesting model that would allow us to tweak it this way or that way, but not to say, because it's working in San Antonio, then that's the right thing for Portland.
That's right. Anyone else have anything to add to this?
I think the only thing that I would add is, as some of you may have been watching us have public meetings and discussions about this, we've looked even, across the pond at different ways that government is run in international ways. One presentation that really sticks out in my mind that I think is probably an ongoing inside joke between us is the fact of having 60 plus burgermeisters who are all running city government. And I forgot which city it was. And we just kind of think about, I just think about what is the jump that Portland will need to do from its current form, especially if it was backed fairly recently, to something that is a little bit more in line with the values that I think all Portlanders want to see in their city government.
Right. Yes, I've heard about those 60 burgomeisters. That's too many.
Could I, Linda, maybe?
Yes, certainly.
Yeah, I think I've been thinking about, obviously, this question for years, and we've had 20 incredible charter commissioners deeply researching and studying and considering form of government, right, for more than a year. And as was shared in our opening remarks, we're actually relatively evenly divided between the two sort of common alternative forms. And so I think, it's a complicated question. And I think we're at the point of maybe trying to move beyond the name mayor council or the name council manager and really hear from Portlanders what roles and responsibilities do they want the mayor to have? What roles and responsibilities do you want a city council member to have? What roles and responsibilities do you want an administrator of any kind to have? And then we can sort of build the form of government that Portlanders are asking for, rather than feeling like we're forced into a dichotomy and have to choose one and then replicate it, like Melanie was saying.
Right. You don't want to necessarily fit into a box if the box isn't going to fit Portland. Right. I hear you. I agree. I would be hard pressed to pick one over the other, knowing that there are good things about both that we could use. So a question now for Commissioner Billings-Young about the district representation. And underlying this strategy is our belief in the importance of having a responsive government, which engages with the community and represents us all. What are you finding to be the pros and cons of district representation and the multi-member versus single-member districts compared to the at-large positions that we have now?
When we talk amongst ourselves and when we listen to the public, and we've had well over 1,000 comments at this point, there's not a lot of cons to district representation. People want that. People in Portland, especially when you get farther out into Southeast and Northeast, they're so frustrated that they feel that nobody represents them. Nobody understands the problems that they are facing on a day-to-day basis. They want someone that they can call on the phone who can answer their issues. So that one is relatively across the board. There is some people have heard a speech by the mayor of San Francisco who didn't like district representation because she said it made everybody NIMBY. I think people are quite capable of being NIMBY without district representation. They don't need any extra help. And the fact is, it's not realistic. If you have 6 districts, if you have 7 districts, you can't only look after your district. You have to be able to agree with other people. So it's a bit of a false argument. In terms of the multi-member districts, there is a lot of research that shows that it gives more representation to non-dominant groups. And among that, I would point out particularly racial minority groups within a neighborhood, women in particular. There was a study that was done in Maryland, New Hampshire, and Virginia that showed that if a district elected 2 people as opposed to 1, that in every case, more women became representatives, because given a choice, they're going to go for the guy. But if they can have 2, then they're willing to be more expansive. And that is definitely true also when it comes to different races or someone with not as much money. It opens the door to promoting more diversity and people who don't have to have all the money to win that winner take all. Right. Now, the issue with multi-member is it only works really well if you combine it with proportional voting. Mm-hmm. And so what we have in Portland right now, as you well know, Linda, is one giant multi-member district.
Right.
And if you do it each one separately, then the top paid person, the person who's getting all the money, can win in every one of those districts. But if you can open it up to a proportional representative system, then it allows more of a minority voice. And by minority, I don't mean racial minority necessarily. It could be renters. It could be just people with different interests within the district to have a voice as well. And so we are looking very seriously at multi-member districts.
And how do you think it would work with the preferential voting system? Do you think it would be easy enough to understand?
I think that ranked choice voting, this is me personally, because we're still split on this, but I personally think that ranked choice voting is pretty easy to understand. You look at something, you say, who do you like the best? Who do you like second? Who do you like third? You don't have to, In the last election, I think for one of our districts, there were 13 people. You don't have to rank all 13. You can stop at 3 if you want to do it. So I think that that's relatively easy for people to grasp, and they've seen it in other communities.
Right. And as I've said to a number of people, if New York City can do it with its diversity of population, we should be able to do it. That's my feeling.
I think that's Portland's motto.
Yeah. Anyone else want to chime in on this question about representation in districts?
I'll just chime in to say that I think what's most appealing to me about multi-member districts is that ability for people to unite around different interests and get their person. And I think one question that always comes up is, well, if I have 3 people representing me, how do I know who my representative is? Or what if they don't get along? Or, what if all of 3 of them ignore me and then, it's not actually increasing my access? These are the kinds of things we're hearing from people, and they're valid, questions. The way I see it is, if you're able to, one, have a different way to vote so that you can better show your preferences in your ballot, and then 2, have your interest. Me personally, as a renter, that is a huge issue that I vote on. I look for the renter-friendly candidates, and that is who I want to represent me. And so I feel like it's going to make it easier for some of those voices to emerge and to be able to be selected. And I'll likely lean on, if I got my renter candidate in office, that's probably who I'm going to talk to. Yeah, I have 3 options, but I'll probably talk to them. And I think the other thing is, people say, oh, well, it feels confusing because of so many of our other electeds are single member districts, if you will. But we do have an example of, our senators, for example. Both of our senators represent the entire state. But, you vote for them at different times, and they obviously have different personalities and reasons that you vote for them. So I think that it is still familiar, but it definitely would take some getting used to. But I always say that for people that have that concern of there being too many people representing you, I say, vote. You're going to have a better chance of getting the person you like in, and that's all that matters. If other people get their person, that's great. You go call them. When I have a problem, I'm going to call my person. And I think that just really, for me, empowers me to know that I will feel more confident that I'll have a voice that really truly represents my interests, representing my area.
Yes, that sounds good. Right. My candidate, so to speak. Now for Commissioner Streeter, we've been thinking about what criteria the commission will use to make decisions about the content of the ballot measures, and how can you decide which reforms are the priorities? I mean, this is really key, I think.
Yeah, I think I can kind of answer this question in sort of 2 pieces. So when the commission was first getting together and we were deciding what areas we want to focus on, we went through a process to identify those issues. And of course, the ones we're talking about the most during this presentation are elections and form of government. But there were other areas of interest that came up for the group, such as housing and homelessness, affordable housing, climate justice and environmental justice, police accountability, and public safety. And so we've kind of developed this process that you saw earlier on a slide that has phase 1, where we're focusing the bulk of our time around elections and form of government. And then the second phase that gets into more of those issues of concern and areas that we want to spend time in subgroups addressing. But in taking a look at all those items, we have a set of values that we're adhering our work to, that we are constantly referring back to. You mentioned a couple of those earlier, Linda, when you're talking about accountability and transparency, equity, and a more responsive and accessible government.
Right.
And we would kind of draw those values back to the areas that we wanted to address in the charter. And so as we're going through our work and our research, we would ask questions of okay, we want to have a more transparent form of government. How do we make that happen? Who's in charge of those roles? what sort of system can we set up where we make the mayor more accountable? Or how can we make sure communities involved in budget creation and sort of building a ship in that way to make this calculus and looking at like the systems and the research we analyze and sort of piecing all that together. And then I think another portion of that is really getting feedback from community in our engagement processes. So this is just one type of forum that we've regularly engaged with, but we've reached out to neighborhood associations, community-based organizations, and have actually enlisted some of those organizations to help us bring back input. So we're making sure to capture groups that have been left out of participating. And so we're kind of mashing all these things up together. And it's not necessarily like a strict criteria of like, okay, like let's check the box on these things. But it's more of like, okay, does this feel good? Does this feel comfortable? Does this make sense? And then do we have buy-in from the communities that are giving us input?
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I think so. You know, a checklist, keeping in your head, this will help bring us towards accountability and this will help bring us towards equity. I think that's all very helpful. Julia, the key question for you is, how are the measures being written? Are they interdependent or standalone? We don't want another 2007 thing where some things passed and some didn't, so it fell apart. How are we going to write the ballot measures to be sure that if voters pass some and not others, we'll still see some changes?
I appreciate this question, and we're getting it more and more frequently, which I also like because I think folks are kind of moving down in our timeline, you know, and thinking through ballot measure construction. So I think Melanie mentioned earlier that the Charter Commission recently made some formal requests to the City of Portland for information that we think we need at the Charter Commission and that Portlanders need to sort of assess and continue to refine our areas of agreement. And one of those requests is to the City Attorney's Office, specifically around ballot measure construction. And we've asked for some guidance on, you know, even just based on the 3 areas of agreement that the Charter Commission currently has, how many ballot measures does that reform package entail? That may be a specific answer, or it may be a, you know, maybe, right, sort of answer.
Yeah.
I do think it's unlikely to be a single ballot measure. You know, we've also asked the City Attorney's Office to look at how other jurisdictions have constructed similar ballot measures. And then this question about what happens if, you know, interrelated measures don't all pass or all fail. I will say it is possible that interrelated measures don't all pass or all fail, right? I mean, that is up to all of us as Portlanders. And so the example I always think about is, you know, hypothetically, if we have 2 ballot measures, one that changes the form of government away from the commission form, and let's say one that is for district-based elections, and those are 2 separate ballot measures. What happens if we have district-based elections pass and the form of government change fail, and you end up with district-based elections in a commission form of government, which generally it's seen that those are incompatible systems, right? So, but there's no legal incompatibility, right? I mean, you can actually legally have those 2 things happen simultaneously. So one of the things I've been thinking more about is when a reform passes in November, its implementation of that reform is not going to be like switching on a light switch. Right? We don't change our form of government overnight. We don't change our electoral system overnight. These are reforms that will take time to implement. And so we may have a bit of a grace period depending on the outcome of the election to do any course correction based on the outcome of the election.
Right. Right. That sounds very good. That sounds like what one has to do. I'll remind you that if you have a question, put it in the chat. I see people are definitely taking advantage of that. For the next question, we'd like to hear from all of you. As you know, the League of Women Voters is an organization that exists to empower civic engagement. And we spend our time educating voters, empowering Portlanders to participate in government, to make democracy work. That's our slogan. And you've all been a living example of making democracy work. And you're part of a massive public civic education process and are to be congratulated for that. And you've reached out in situations like this and others to engage voters and potential voters. What lessons have you learned from this? And what can you teach us and groups like us that are trying to do this all the time? So any of you who have a little bit to say on that, we really appreciate it. What should we learn from you about how to educate people in a way that things they haven't even thought about, perhaps?
I'll start us off. I'll just say that first and foremost, what has been really interesting to me along this process, as you know, we're currently going through a lot as a city. We have a lot of issues in front of us, and people, frankly, are really desperate for change. So that has been something I've noticed, is that just giving a listening ear has been so valuable to so many of the people that we've engaged with. And I think that's so reflective of why we desperately need to change the way our government works and is responsive and is accountable to people, because that is really what so many are yearning for. I also think that, you know, it's been challenging. The truth is, it's hard. It's really hard to figure out how to reach all corners of the city. And we're still learning every single day of how to improve that. I think there's a combination of making sure that we're building strong partnerships with people like the League of Women Voters, groups that already have deep relationships with groups of people that can build a bridge for us. And I think it's important that we not only rely on that, because those groups, as great of work as they do, engaging their communities, there's so many other people that might not fit into that perfect box. And so the effort has to be both. And so I think we've really just learned that we need to have a diverse approach. We need to make sure that things are easily accessible. The nice thing in the digital age is that we can make recordings and people can join from their cell phone in their car or wherever. So I think that has been a really great thing about having Zoom, being forced to be stuck in our little boxes. And so I think there's actually a lot to learn about how we as a city can adapt to that. I mean, obviously, yes, people are yearning for in-person connection, and I think there's value to that too. But the way that online has increased accessibility is super significant, and we should take lessons from that and apply it to future engagement.
Good. Anyone else have
I think what Candace said was spot on, as it always is when Candace speaks. But I would just add to that something that you said, Linda, and that is, you said that you're just going after all your neighbors and saying, have you thought about this? Well, I found it's really beneficial just to keep shoving yourself out there and you know, talking to people. Many people don't even believe they have the right to ask. And I will give complete call out to Julia and the team in the project management side for finding groups that heretofore felt they had no right to even question these things. And I think the most important thing that we can do when we meet those groups is not educate them, but let them educate us.
And both ways, and have them work with their neighbors too, of the next round, the next layer of people. Well, you know, I know that there are a large number of questions in the chat. So what I'm going to do is ask one more final question for each of you, like a minute's worth of each. And then we're going to go to the questions from the chat. And the final question is for each of you: what is your brightest hope for how this charter reform process can help Portland grow and change and evolve?
Well, I'll start that one.
Okay.
My brightest hope is that we end the commission form of government, because when that ends, then you have elected officials who can pay attention to their constituents and not run bureaus, and we can start connecting again with our government.
Adding on to Melanie's hope, I think we all have that hope. I'm hoping for more representation, just generally. It's been taken over 100 years to see our first Black commissioner and to see diversity on the council. And there just hasn't been enough representation, and so many communities have been left out of government. And I think it just builds up this idea of distrust and helplessness that communities face. And so if we can change that in any small way, whether that's increasing the size of council or having districts or changing the way we have our elections, that's my hope, that we get to some better representation and equity out of this process.
Right, right. Candace?
I think that, at the end of the day, one other thing that I've learned in this process is that we can change the rules and we can change how everything works, but it's ultimately going to take strong leadership to get us through our problems. And my biggest hope is, I think that's the thing that people look to us and they're like, can you fix, houselessness, and can you fix these issues? And it's like, we can definitely tweak the rules and the laws to make it easier. So my greatest hope is just to give the right leaders the right tools and give the voters the right, more expanded ballot box options. So that combination of things can hopefully produce strong leaders that reflect the communities and can get things done.
Good. Julia, what about you?
I think this is a very important question that I hope all Portlanders ask themselves about charter review, because I do sometimes worry that many of us believe that Portlanders are increasingly dissatisfied with city government right now. And there's this call and an urgency around change. But I don't think change for the sake of change is what we're trying to do, right? I don't think you reform a constitution or a charter for the sake of it, right? And so I think that's why the commission's work around articulating outcomes is so important, right? And I think for Portlanders to ask themselves, like, am I pro charter reform because I'm unhappy and I just think something should change? Or it's like you proactively believe that a certain change will achieve an outcome that you care about. So I do think we should be asking ourselves that question all of the time when we think about charter reform. For me, the desired outcome of the commission that I always come back to when I'm wondering, are we on track, is the more participatory and growing democracy. I always sort of ask myself, is what we're talking about right now likely to contribute to that? Build political power in our communities, more voices and people being heard in city decision making, and also an excitement, right? A joy, an enjoyment for your participation, and a knowledge and belief that your participation mattered. And I think if we could do that, I would feel that our work was successful.
That's what we call making democracy work. And that's what the League believes in. So thank you all. This has been such a treat for me to get to engage with you and hear what you're thinking about. But I am now going to introduce my colleague, Audrey Dunkel-DeCourcy, who will bring up some questions from the audience. There are a lot of them. Audrey is a member of the League Board with a background in criminal justice reform, public health, and faith-based community organizing, and a very good question writer. Okay, Audrey, take it away.
Thank you, Linda, and thank you, Commissioners and Ms. Meyer, for joining us. I also want to thank the over 60 people joining us in the live audience tonight and for the many questions you've sent in. We'll get through as many as we can. I have kind of grouped together a few questions about districts and kind of district-based representation. One kind of quick question about if there's going to be a redistricting process associated with the district form of government. I believe there is, along the lines of the county and other districts that we're part of. Do you want to clarify how the redistricting process would happen so that population shifts are taken into account?
I can go ahead and jump in and welcome anyone
Commissioner
to
Streeter, thank you.
to add in more. I think this is a question that we were discussing at length at our last meeting about what is the right way to designate districts. And I don't think a lot of us felt very comfortable drawing that map ourselves or making that a part of this process. As we know, there's lots of ways to do that. And so I think for us, we're interested in recommending a process to make sure that districting, not redistricting yet, is actually equitable and is able to have good representation. And I don't think it's as easy as saying like, okay, there's this many people over here and we should just cut up the map of Portland in that way, or we should just cut across the river or down the river or things like that. I think it will take a lot of thoughtfulness around what the number of districts that we're looking at, right? Because we're starting with one big area, and then how that representation comes out and shakes out. I think there's a lot of questions into that and could probably dictate the process for drawing out a map.
Yeah, the only thing I'd add to that is, there's lots of ways that districting processes work in other jurisdictions. And so we don't have to reinvent the wheel entirely. There's lots that we're going to take from other processes. Of course, we're going to add that additional equity lens and make sure that we're writing something in the charter that's going to ensure that that process is reflective of what the community wants. And I think ultimately what we're going to be deciding, though, is how many districts and how many commissioners. That is our goal, is to put those parameters as well as the process. And then from there, we just had our census. So that's likely, as far as redistricting is going to align with the census, just like it does for everyone else. But ideally, what's probably going to happen is there's going to be a group of people that are going to be put together that are going to have this guidelines we put in the charter, and they're going to do that process.
Thank you, Commissioner Avalos. So
The only thing I would add to that real quickly, Audrey, is that we're hearing a lot from Portlanders. They like their neighborhoods. They have a real sense of belonging to their neighborhoods. So we would hope that whatever process goes into place would show a certain recognition for holding neighborhoods together.
Thank you, Commissioner Bellings-Young. We have a series of interesting questions kind of about the potential challenges, I think, of districts and multi-member districts, including from some people who very much support increasing the size of council and moving away from the commission form of government. I think just testing out different ideas here. And I'll start with this question for Commissioner Streeter, if you wouldn't mind. There's a few questions, and I'll just put them out there and you can answer how and as you wish. So, how can we ensure commissioners with accountability to one area of Portland not fight for their own fiefdom at the expense of other areas? Another question, is there a tension at play in making the council more diverse at the same time taking away a lot of the commissioners' direct power, since so much of their current power is in their executive roles? There's also an accountability question. If multi-member districts, if there are multi-member groups running against each other, it's easier to vote someone in. Isn't it much harder to vote someone out as well?
I really appreciate all these questions and love this discussion. I'll try to answer each of those. So the first question is actually a question I've had myself, honestly. And what would be the best way to ensure that you don't have a representative that just kind of hunkers down and says, I only care about South Waterfront. I'm picking on my own area. And, I don't care about what's happening in Lents. And I think maybe having some sort of hybrid model to overlay this accountability structure of having a seat like the mayor be voted in at large, and then having these districts to kind of bring in those issues that are very unique to the area, but maybe could be shared across. And I think that's where having multi-member within districts could really help with that, because then you're not having just one person dictate what they believe is important for the region. You have sort of that balance and accountability with at least one other person that can say like, oh, don't forget about this, and able to cross those lines would say, we really do need to invest in East Portland now, because we might not need these investments anymore. And then I think your second question was about,
Yeah,
do you want
I
to
should
just repeat that
it.
real
It was
quick?
a lot. I threw a lot out at you. Is there
Oh,
attention?
I'm sorry, I remember now. You're talking
Yeah.
about empowering the commissioners. And I think this is a really interesting question, and my response might be a little controversial, but I would say that the commissioners right now actually don't have that power. They are meant to like oversee the bureaus and sort of help the bureau directors bring in issues, and then they have an extra responsibility of reacting to situations or issues that are happening on the ground. Let's say the COVID-19 pandemic, or housing, or police accountability. And so we kind of see commissioners being in this situation where they have to juggle a lot of things, as opposed to focusing on bringing forth policies that can impact the entire city versus just their policy area. And so my opinion about that is that if we were to switch away from a commission form of government, we actually are empowering future counselors to be accountable to the public that they represent and to the city government that they're a part of. And then I would love to hear the third question one more time.
Yeah.
It's a very good one, interesting one.
So if multi-member districts or multi-member based elections are easier to vote someone in, isn't it necessarily much harder to vote someone out? So Commissioner Streeter, or anyone who wants to take that on.
Yeah, I welcome my fellow commissioners to add on to that one. I think it's a very interesting question. And I think it's hard to kind of like vote people out right now. And I would say we probably have that better accountability and process from the front end, instead of just picking one out of many choices. We have an opportunity to pick, 2 or 3 people that can be held accountable. And I'm assuming if there's other ways to remove someone quickly, let's say through like a recall process, that it would be maybe a less burdensome process to go through than what we have currently, while still having someone there to be accountable for the work going forward. But I see Candace took off her mute button so she can kind of answer.
Yeah, I mean, I guess to that question, my response would be, it's always hard to get rid of an incumbent. Like that's incumbency. That's not multi-member. So I think, when you have an open seat, it's easier to put someone in. Obviously, we're trying to change the way that you vote so that it's easier for your interest to be represented in the people that get elected. But no matter what, if somebody's running for re-election, that comes with a lot of power because people already know who they are. They have a record they can run on. So that's always going to be the case. And then I wanted to address the second question real quick, as to say, and that's an interesting position, Amira. I can see what you mean by that, but I do also think that, to me personally, it's very important, I agree, to make sure that the counselors do have a good amount of power. I'll just share my personal opinion, is that I really would like to see a balanced mayor council form, in that the counselors have budgetary power, because in a traditional mayor council form, the mayor also oversees the budget. I would actually prefer that the counselors oversee it, and that way, if the mayor is responsible for executing the vision of the city, of the counselors and everyone else, they got to make sure that the council agrees with the budget. They need money to execute that vision. So I see that as being an important way to keep power with the commissioners. And in addition, somebody mentioned it in the chat at some point, that yes, we would want to have some way for commissioners to still be close to bureaus in a sense, and that is likely through a committee structure, so that the beauty of that is different commissioners right now, they run and have different expertise, right? So if I'm going to run and I really care about public safety issues, or I have experience in that area, then I would want to serve on a committee that is a public safety committee that is overseeing the Portland Police Bureau, the fire, 911, BOIC, and I could bring my expertise to that and help shape policy. So that's how I see the commissioners maintaining a strong level of power while still having a more executive function from a mayor, because personally, I think everyone thinks the mayor does everything, and the mayor really doesn't have a lot of power. And I think it would be really important for people to actually vote in a mayor that does have the power to do what they say they want to do. And then when they don't, you can vote them out. So that's kind of my personal opinion of how that should go.
If I can just add a word, Audrey,
Yes.
on questions
Commissioner
1 and
Billings, yeah.
3. And that is, I think that the questions, the one about if they'd only look after their own district or how hard it is to get them out, the questioners are forgetting maybe that there's a difference between electing and governing. And the fact is, if you came from South Waterfront and your person only cares about South Waterfront and is not cooperative with anyone else on anything else, nothing is going to happen in South Waterfront. And therefore the electors are going to get pretty frustrated with that person and vote them out. In the same way, if people represent districts, unlike what is happening now, you've got huge number of potholes in your neighborhood. You don't even know who to get mad at because you have these people who don't represent you specifically. But if you have someone that you've elected and they're not doing anything about your potholes, then you are able to quickly say, that's the person I want to remove from office. So I think that if we look at it, not simply in terms of the first time we elect them, but they have to then come through for the voter, then you see it in a somewhat different way.
Thank you, Commissioner Billings-Young. We have many more questions and not enough time, but I wanted to kind of round this out with your thoughts about the question of voter engagement. And I know we have seen polling that Portland voters are ready for change in city government, possibly supporting changes to the commission form of government, as Ms. Meyer has mentioned. So the question is, how are you going to continue engaging voters in these reforms as the work of the commission moves from ideas to ballot measures? And yeah, so that is the question.
I'll go ahead and kick us off.
Commissioner Streeter.
Oh, sorry, Julia, if you want to answer that.
No, well, let me give the city response and then the commissioners can maybe expand. So, because this is crucial, right? So we think that our ballot referrals will happen in early July. And then there was the period from the ballot referral to the November election. In that period, there is limitations on public officials, which includes myself and charter commissioners, advocating on behalf of those ballot measures, as opposed to doing pure education about the meaning of the ballot measures. And I think that may be a challenging space. And so I guess I would say, since we're here with the league, I do think it's going to be, trusted organizations who can deliver messages during that time that we're going to be relying on to, yes, explain and educate, but also to make those connections between something like a form of government and an electoral system and the things that Portlanders are concerned about in their day-to-day lives. And those stories and those threads are so crucial. And so having organizations that have communities and constituents who can, share those stories with others and help make those connections, I think is fundamental to the success of the reforms.
Yeah, I think adding on to what Julia just mentioned, I think a lot of us on the commission have a lot of uh, take a lot of responsibility for this work, and this is not necessarily like our baby, but in a lot of ways, we are very passionate and committed to this work and the recommendations that we're pulling together. And so I think in addition to getting the word out in these forums, making sure that organizations that are already aware of this issue are ready to lift up our recommendations and work alongside us and partner with us on that. I think it's really important to once we have something to communicate that out to people so they can understand how it's going to make a difference in their lives. I've heard throughout my career that local government and small government isn't important. And I've actually had people tell me that, I only vote for the president and that's kind of where it ends. And I think it's really important to show people that this is going to make a difference. And our city government is where decisions get made that directly impact us. And I hope that whatever recommendations we have, we're able to show people the time, energy, and work that we've put into it, but also how it could benefit them.
Well, I want to thank you all so much for your public service. You dedicate so many hours on behalf of our city as commissioners. So thank you so much for your time, and especially thank you for your time joining us here tonight. I'm going to turn this over to President Debbie Kay for some closing remarks.
Thank you, everyone. This is an extraordinary program. I've learned so much. I very much regret that we're out of time because I know there are many more important questions. And I appreciate that the attendees have such deep interest in this important topic. It is being recorded and it will be available. Thank you to our speakers, excellent speakers, for such a stimulating and informative discussion. I feel certain that we've learned a lot. I know I have. You've made a very significant time commitment to learn about choices in city government and to figure out how to move Portland forward. We appreciate the critically important work you are doing to represent and engage the community in the city's charter reform process. Thank you for your dedication to our city. The League's next program will highlight ways to tackle the climate crisis. We just don't take on small topics here. League members from throughout the United States who attended the United Nations Climate Conference in Glasgow last year will speak on ways to build a more equitable and clean energy future. Please mark your calendars for March 9th, beginning at 4 o'clock on Zoom. This is scheduled earlier in the day because some of the speakers are joining us from the East Coast. I want to remind you all about the May 17th primary election. If you are new to Oregon, or you've changed your address since the last election, please update your registration. You can do this through our online voter education site at vote411.org. The League of Women Voters is a membership organization. We welcome you to join us, and we would also value your financial support in presenting these and other relevant programs. Please see our membership and donor information at lwvpdx.org. Thank you again for joining this program. Please take care and stay safe.